There comes a moment in life when something simply breaks. It's not a dramatic crash, not a cinematic revelation with an epic soundtrack. It's something more subtle and devastating. It's when you realize that every conversation around you sounds false, when the words people say seem disconnected from any deep truth, when you look into someone's eyes while they're speaking and see that they themselves don't completely believe what they're saying, but they keep saying it anyway. It's as if an invisible curtain had been pulled back, revealing a stage where everyone knows they're performing, but they pretend it's real. Maybe you've already experienced this. That moment when you're in an apparently normal conversation about work, relationships, plans for the future, and suddenly you feel a profound strangeness. The words coming out of people's mouths sound like echoes of other conversations, repetitions of phrases they heard somewhere, social expectations masquerading as personal opinions. You realize you're participating in a grand collective theater where no one admits they're acting. And most disturbing, you're also acting, you're also saying things you don't completely feel, following invisible scripts you learned throughout life. This perception doesn't arrive as a choice. It erupts as an involuntary lucidity that forever changes how you hear the world. Suddenly, you can identify the distance between what people say and what they really feel. You can perceive the fear behind proclaimed certainties, the despair masked as forced optimism, the loneliness disguised as performative sociability. It's as if you had developed an ear capable of detecting the vibration of falseness in words, even when they're spoken with apparent sincerity. Albert Camus knew this experience intimately. He not only lived it, but transformed it into the center of his philosophy. For Camus, this perception of falseness in human conversations wasn't a defect of perception or an excess of skepticism. It was the first sign of awakening to what he called the absurd, the fundamental condition of human existence, where we seek meaning in a universe that remains eternally silent before our deepest questions. When Camus wrote about the absurd man, he was describing someone who had gone through this experience of devastating lucidity, someone who can no longer participate in conventional conversations without feeling a strange weight in their chest, a profound disconnection between what's being said and what really matters. It's someone who discovered that most human communication serves not to reveal truths, but to hide them, to maintain the illusion that everything makes sense, that we're all walking towards somewhere significant, that our daily concerns have a cosmic importance they simply don't possess. But here's something crucial we'll discover together. This lucidity, however painful it may be initially, is not a condemnation, it's a liberation. When you stop believing in false conversations, when you stop pretending that empty words have weight, when you accept that most human interactions are elaborate games of make-believe, something extraordinary happens. You begin to value in a completely new way the genuine moments of human connection. You develop a special sensitivity to detect when someone is speaking from an authentic place. And most importantly, you begin to find your own true voice. In the next 50 minutes, we're going to explore this journey of lucidity. We'll understand how this perception develops, why it's both so disturbing and so necessary, and how we can live authentically in a world where most communication is performative. We'll discover how Camus teaches us that recognizing falseness doesn't make us cynical, but rather more deeply human. And we'll explore how this awareness can transform from a source of alienation into a source of freedom and genuine authenticity. The first sign that something is changing in your perception is subtle. You're in a work meeting, or maybe at lunch with friends, and someone is talking about their goals, their dreams, their concerns. The words are familiar. You've heard variations of this same conversation hundreds of times. But today, something is different. Today you're hearing not just the words, but the emptiness that exists between them. You're perceiving the mechanics behind the performance. The person is saying they want to grow in their career, that they seek professional fulfillment, that they're working hard to achieve their objectives. The words sound correct, appropriate, even inspiring. But you can feel something deeper happening. You can perceive that these words were borrowed from some invisible manual about how one should talk about life. You can notice that the person is reciting a script they learned about what it means to be successful, about what they should want, about how they should feel regarding the future. And then comes the most disturbing perception of all. You recognize this script because you've used it yourself. You remember having said exactly these things, having expressed exactly these feelings, not because you really felt them, but because they were the appropriate things to say, because they were the words that filled uncomfortable silence, that kept the conversation flowing, that made other people nod in approval and share their own scripts in return. This is the first layer of the awakening that Camus describes. It's when you begin to perceive that most of our conversations aren't genuine attempts at communication, but elaborate social rituals. They're ways of mutually confirming that we still believe in the same illusions, that we're still participating in the same collective game of pretending that life has a clear script and that we all know our roles. You begin to notice this everywhere. In how people talk about relationships, always using the same metaphors about finding the right person, about working on the relationship, about growing together. The words are beautiful, but you can perceive that they're often being used to avoid confronting the more complex and messy reality of real human feelings. People talk about love as if it were an engineering project with clear steps and predictable results, because it's more comfortable than admitting that love is frequently chaotic, inexplicable, and frighteningly vulnerable. You perceive this in conversations about the future, where people express confidence and optimism they clearly don't feel. They talk about their plans as if the universe were cooperative, as if life were a predictable narrative where effort always leads to success and where dreams come true for those who work hard enough. But you can hear the anxiety behind this proclaimed confidence. You can perceive that these words are talismans against fear, attempts to conjure certainty in a fundamentally uncertain world. And then you begin to perceive something even deeper. People aren't necessarily being dishonest on purpose. They believe, at least partially, in what they're saying. They've internalized these scripts so deeply that they can no longer distinguish between what they really feel and what they learned they should feel. It's as if everyone were actors who performed the same role for so long that they forgot who they were before stepping on stage. Camus called this existential bad faith. It's not a conscious and malicious lie, but a way of fleeing from the terrible and liberating responsibility of creating our own meanings. It's easier to repeat the words we were taught about what life should be than to confront the frightening silence that exists when we stop talking and simply listen to our own experience. In this phase of awakening, you might feel profoundly lonely. It's as if you were watching a movie in which everyone else are characters, but you somehow stepped out of the screen and are observing from outside. You want to participate, want to return to the comfort of unconsciousness, but you can no longer not see what you're seeing. You can no longer not hear the artificiality in conversations that once seemed natural. You try to participate anyway. You try to say the things people expect to hear, try to express the appropriate feelings at the appropriate moments. But now you're conscious that you're acting, and this consciousness makes the acting almost impossible. It's like trying to be spontaneous on purpose, or trying to fall asleep by forcing sleep. The consciousness of performance destroys the performance, and then something interesting happens. In this loneliness, in this estrangement, you begin to develop a new and more refined sensitivity. You become capable of detecting the rare moments when someone steps out of the script, when someone says something that comes from a genuine place, when someone expresses confusion instead of certainty, when someone admits they don't know what they're doing or where they're going. These moments stand out like beacons amid the fog of conventional conversations. You begin to value these moments in a way you never valued before. A person admitting they're afraid, that they're lost, that they don't understand what's happening with their life, suddenly sounds more true and more beautiful than all the proclamations of confidence and success you've heard. Someone saying, "I don't know," with honesty, becomes more interesting than someone pretending to have all the answers. This is the second layer of awakening. You're not just perceiving falseness, you're developing a sharpened capacity to recognize authenticity when it appears. And you're beginning to understand that authenticity has nothing to do with having the right answers or expressing appropriate feelings. It has to do with being willing to recognize and express your real experience, even when that experience is confusing, contradictory, or uncomfortable. Camus understood that this perception was only the beginning of a longer journey. Recognizing falseness in human conversations is like waking up from a dream. At first you feel disoriented, lost, not knowing how to navigate in a world that suddenly seems strange and artificial. But with time, you begin to learn that this lucidity isn't a curse. It's the first step toward a more authentic way of living and relating to other people. Once you recognize the mechanics of false conversations, once you develop this sensitivity to detect when people are reciting scripts instead of expressing real experiences, you face a fundamental question. What now? How do you live with this consciousness? How do you relate to other people when you can hear the distance between their words and their real feelings? The first natural reaction is what we can call nostalgic resistance. Part of you desperately wants to return to the time when conversations seemed natural, when you could participate in them without this constant sensation of watching a performance. You remember with nostalgia the times when you could talk about the future with confidence, when you could express optimism without feeling like you were lying, when you could use conventional words about love, success, and happiness without hearing the hollow echo you now detect in them. But this nostalgia is in itself a form of bad faith. It's an attempt to flee from the responsibility that comes with lucidity. Because once you see, you can no longer not see. Once you develop this capacity to detect authenticity or its lack in people's words, there's no way to turn it off. It's like trying to unlearn how to read. The words will continue to make sense, whether you want them to or not. Camus knew that this nostalgia was a trap. In his writings, he constantly warned against the temptation of what he called philosophical suicide, the attempt to escape the absurd condition by returning to unconsciousness, to blind faith in conventional narratives about life's meaning. For him, once you awaken to the absurd, once you recognize the fundamental distance between our desires for meaning and the universe's silence, trying to return to unconsciousness is a form of betrayal against your own experience. But this doesn't mean you should resign yourself to cynicism or isolation. On the contrary, Camus proposed something much more radical: complete acceptance of the absurd condition, not as a defeat, but as the starting point for a more authentic life. When you stop trying to escape the perception that conversations sound false, when you stop fighting against this lucidity, something extraordinary happens. You begin to discover possibilities that simply didn't exist while you were trapped in conventional scripts. You discover, for example, that you can choose to participate in social conversations in a different way. You no longer need to pretend you completely believe the words you're saying, but you also don't need to become hostile or disdainful toward people who are still trapped in their scripts. You can participate with a kind of compassionate solidarity, understanding that everyone is doing their best to navigate a confusing and often senseless world. This solidarity is different from complicity. When you were unconscious of the scripts, you participated in them automatically, reinforcing collective illusions without even realizing it. Now you can choose when and how to participate. You can offer people the comfort of familiar words when they need it, but without losing sight of the more complex reality behind those words. More importantly, you begin to discover your own authentic voice. When you stop worrying about saying the right things, when you stop trying to fit your experience into conventional narrative molds, you become free to express what you're really feeling and thinking. And this often surprises the people around you. You might discover, for example, that when you express genuine uncertainty instead of false confidence, people feel more comfortable sharing their own uncertainties. When you admit you don't know what you're doing, instead of pretending you have a clear plan, you give others permission to also lower their masks. When you talk about love, work, or the future in a way that includes the real complexity and contradiction of these experiences, you invite others to step out of their own scripts. Camus saw this as a form of revolt, not a violent or destructive revolt, but a creative revolt against falseness. It's the revolt of refusing to pretend the world makes more sense than it really does. It's the revolt of choosing authenticity even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't fit social expectations. This revolt has profound practical consequences. Your relationships begin to change. Some people might pull away, uncomfortable with your new tendency to say things that don't follow familiar scripts. But other people, those who were secretly starving for more real conversations, begin to draw closer. You attract people who are also tired of constant performance, who also yearn for more genuine connections. You discover there's a huge difference between being alone and being lonely. When you were trapped in conventional scripts, You could be surrounded by people but feel profoundly isolated, because no one was really seeing or hearing who you were behind the performance. Now, even when you're physically alone, you have more real company, your own authentic experience, and you begin to understand something Camus considered fundamental: that authentic revolt isn't against other people, but against the absurd condition itself. Other people aren't enemies for being trapped in false scripts. They are, as you were, trying to find a way to deal with the fundamental difficulty of existing in a world that doesn't offer ready answers to life's most important questions. This understanding brings a different form of compassion. You no longer feel superiority toward those who still automatically participate in conventional conversations. Instead, you recognize in them the same search for meaning and connection that motivates you. The difference is that you chose to confront the absence of ready-made meanings, while they're still trying to find comfort in inherited narratives. But here's something crucial that Camus understood. This compassion cannot transform into condescension. You cannot see yourself as more enlightened or more evolved than those who still live according to conventional scripts. That would be just another form of bad faith, another way to avoid completely confronting your own absurd condition. Lucidity isn't a prize you win, it's a responsibility you carry. Now leave a comment sharing. Have you ever felt this strangeness in everyday conversations? Have you ever had the sensation that people are reciting scripts instead of expressing what they really feel? Tell us about your experience with this perception. After going through the initial awakening, after recognizing falseness in conversations and developing a sensitivity to authenticity, you face the most complex challenge of all: how to build an authentic life in the midst of a world that functions largely based on performances. How to maintain your integrity without becoming a hermit. How to honor your lucidity without becoming bitter or cynical. Camus saw this phase as the moment when the absurd man is truly born. It's not enough to simply recognize the absurd. It's not enough to see through collective illusions. The real challenge is learning to live fully with this consciousness, without fleeing from it, but also without being crushed by it. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive part of Camus' philosophy. He argued that completely accepting the absence of cosmic meaning doesn't lead to despair, but to freedom. When you stop looking for a pre-established purpose for your life, when you accept that the universe won't deliver you a ready script, you become free to create your own values and meanings. In your daily conversations, this translates into a completely new way of relating to words and people. You're no longer trying to find in conversations a confirmation that life makes sense. You're no longer looking for absolute truths or definitive answers. Instead, you're seeking moments of genuine human connection, recognizing that these moments are precious precisely because they're temporary and fragile. You develop what we can call a Camusian ear. It's the ability to hear not just the words people say, but the vulnerable humanity behind those words. When someone talks about their future plans using all the conventional phrases about success and fulfillment, you can hear both the script and the real person trying to convince themselves that these plans make sense. And instead of feeling superior or irritated by the performance, you feel a specific form of solidarity, the solidarity of someone who recognizes the shared human condition. This solidarity fundamentally changes how you participate in conversations. You're no longer trying to convince people that their scripts are false. You're not trying to awaken others to the same lucidity you developed. Instead, you're offering something more subtle and more valuable: your authentic presence. When you speak from a real place, when you express your experience without trying to fit it into conventional molds, you create a space where others can also be more real. This doesn't mean you become brutally honest or that you completely discard social conventions. Camus understood that conventions have a function. They allow society to function. They allow people to relate without having to constantly renegotiate the basic rules of interaction. The problem isn't conventions themselves, but when they become invisible prisons that prevent us from accessing our genuine experience. You learn to navigate between these two worlds, the world of necessary social conventions and the world of your authentic experience. You can participate in a conversation about work using the appropriate vocabulary about goals and professional growth, but without losing contact with the real complexity of your feelings about work, purpose, and time. You can talk about relationships using familiar words about love and commitment, but keeping alive your awareness of how mysterious and unpredictable human feelings really are. This navigation requires a specific form of courage that Camus deeply admired. It's the courage to live simultaneously on two levels of reality: the social level, where certain words and behaviors are expected, and the existential level, where you recognize you're creating meaning moment by moment without guarantees or pre-established scripts. Over time, you realize that this double consciousness isn't a source of constant tension, but rather a source of freedom. When you no longer need to completely believe the words you say to function socially, you become free to experiment with different forms of expression. When you accept that all human conversations are, to some degree, performances, you can consciously choose what type of performance you want to offer. You can choose, for example, to be the type of person who offers other people a space to step out of their own scripts. You can ask questions that invite genuine reflection instead of automatic responses. You can share your own uncertainties in a way that normalizes uncertainty instead of pretending that certainty is possible. You can express appreciation for the complexity and contradiction of human life instead of trying to simplify everything into ordered narratives. This conscious choice of how to present yourself in conversations is what Camus saw as a form of art. You're creating, moment by moment, the type of person you want to be and the type of world you want to live in. You're not following a pre-written script about how to be a good person or how to have successful conversations. You're improvising based on your own consciously chosen values. And here's something surprising. When you stop trying to make conversations work according to conventional expectations, they often become more interesting and more satisfying. When you stop trying to impress people with your right answers and begin to share your real questions, conversations take on a different quality. When you stop trying to solve other people's problems with advice based on known scripts and begin to simply witness their experience with real presence, you offer something much more valuable. People feel the difference, even when they can't articulate exactly what's different. They feel they can relax a bit in their own performance when they're with you. They feel it's safe to express confusion, contradiction, uncertainty. And this creates the type of connection everyone secretly yearns for, but rarely experiences. The connection that happens when two people mutually recognize their vulnerable and shared humanity. Camus called this solidary lucidity. Justice, it's when your consciousness of the absurd doesn't isolate you from other people, but connects you with them in a deeper way. You're no longer trying to find people who think like you or who share your specific beliefs. You're looking for moments of mutual recognition of the human condition, moments when the social mask temporarily falls and two people see each other as they really are. Conscious beings trying to create meaning in a universe that doesn't offer clear instructions. As you develop this capacity to live consciously between the social world and the existential world, you discover something that might seem paradoxical. Accepting that conversations are often false doesn't make you value human communication less. It makes you value more the moments of genuine communication. It makes you more sensitive to the nuances of human expression, more capable of detecting and appreciating when someone is speaking from an authentic place. You also discover that your own capacity for communication expands in unexpected ways. When you're no longer limited by conventional scripts, when you no longer need to make your words fit into predetermined molds, you can begin to explore more creative and precise ways of expressing your experience. You can develop your own vocabulary for feelings and situations that conventional scripts can't adequately capture. This expansion of your expressive capacity is itself a form of revolt against the absurd. It's a refusal to accept that the richness of human experience can be reduced to the limited categories offered by social conventions. It's an insistence that your specific, unique, and irreplicable experience deserves to find expression, even if that requires you to invent new ways of talking about it. In this phase of the journey, you're beginning to live what Camus saw as the most dignified and courageous response to the absurd condition. Not denial, not escape, but conscious creation of value and meaning amid the absence of cosmic guarantees. You're learning that lucidity doesn't need to lead to isolation or cynicism. It can lead to deeper and more satisfying forms of human connection. There's a moment in the evolution of this consciousness when something fundamentally changes in your relationship with language and with other people. You're no longer fighting against the falseness of conventional conversations, nor trying to escape from it. You completely accept that this is the human condition. We are beings who need to use imperfect words to try to communicate experiences that often transcend language. And within this acceptance, you find a new and unexpected freedom. Camus described this moment as the birth of the revolted man. Not the man who revolts against society or against other people, but the man who revolts against the temptation to live inauthentically. It's a silent and constant revolt, the refusal to betray your own experience to fit expectations, combined with the refusal to judge or despise those who still need those expectations to function. In this phase, your conversations transform into something like a conscious dance. You participate in necessary social rituals, but with full awareness that they are rituals. You offer people the words they need to feel safe and understood, but without losing contact with the real complexity that exists behind those words. And when the opportunity arises, when someone demonstrates they're ready for a deeper conversation, you know how to create the space for that to happen. This ability to consciously navigate between different levels of communication becomes a form of practical art. You develop a refined sensitivity to detect when someone is really asking for help behind their conventional words. When someone says, "I'm fine," in a way that clearly indicates they're not fine, you know how to offer an opening for a more real conversation without forcing anything. When someone talks about their future plans with confidence that sounds forced, you can offer a space where it's safe to express uncertainty. But perhaps most importantly, you learn to do this for yourself. You develop the ability to honor your own complex experience without trying to force it into simple categories. When someone asks how you are, you can consciously choose what level of response is appropriate for the situation and for the person. You can offer the expected social response when that's what the situation calls for, but without losing contact with the real richness of how you're feeling. You discover there's a huge difference between lying and consciously choosing what aspect of truth to share in each moment. When you were trapped in conventional scripts, you often lied to yourself about what you were feeling, trying to make your real feelings fit into appropriate categories. Now you can fully feel the complexity of your experience, and then choose how to express it in a way that's useful, both for you and for the person you're talking to. This freedom brings with it a new responsibility. When you stop being an unconscious victim of social scripts, when you become capable of consciously navigating between different forms of communication, you also become responsible for the choices you make. You can no longer blame society or conventions for your own inauthenticity. If you choose to participate in a superficial conversation, it's because you decided that was the most appropriate choice in that moment, not because you were forced into it. Camus saw this responsibility as liberating, not oppressive. When you completely accept that you're creating your own life moment by moment, that there's no external authority that will tell you how to live or what to value, you become free in a way that few experience. Free to value what you choose to value. Free to create the relationships you want to create. Free to express yourself in the way you feel is most authentic. In your daily conversations, this manifests as a different presence. People feel that you're really present, really listening, really available for what's happening in the moment. They feel they don't need to perform for you, that they can relax a bit in their own social masks. And this creates the type of interaction everyone desires, but rarely experiences. Interaction where two people meet as they really are, not as they think they should be. You also discover you can tolerate much more ambiguity and uncertainty in conversations. When someone expresses contradictory feelings, when someone doesn't know how they feel about something, when someone changes their mind in the middle of a sentence, you no longer feel the need to resolve this ambiguity or offer simple answers. You can simply witness the complexity of human experience without trying to organize it into ordered categories. This tolerance for ambiguity is, itself, a gift you offer to people. In a world that constantly pressures everyone to have clear opinions, defined feelings, and specific plans, your ability to accept and honor the natural confusion of human experience is deeply refreshing. People feel seen and accepted in their real complexity, not just in their simplified and socially appropriate versions. and you discover something that might seem surprising. This acceptance of ambiguity doesn't lead to confusion or paralysis. On the contrary, when you stop trying to force clarity where it doesn't naturally exist, you become more capable of acting based on what you really know and feel. Your decisions become more authentic because they're not being distorted by the need to fit into conventional narratives about what you should want or how you should feel. Your conversations become laboratories where you and others can explore together the richness and complexity of human experience. Instead of using words to confirm what you already know or think you know, you use them to discover new things about yourselves and about the world. Instead of exchanging certainties, you share questions. Instead of trying to solve each other, you simply accompany each other on the journey of trying to understand what it means to be human in a world that doesn't come with instructions. At this point in the journey, you're living what Camus considered the most courageous and most beautiful response to the absurd, the conscious creation of value and connection amid the absence of guaranteed meaning. You no longer need the universe to tell you that your life matters or that your conversations have cosmic purpose. You create importance and purpose through your moment-by-moment choices, through your availability to meet other people in their real and vulnerable humanity. And subscribe to the channel to receive more content about existentialist philosophy and how to apply these ideas in practical life. Your conversations can become more authentic and meaningful when you deeply understand these concepts we're exploring. After years living with this consciousness, after learning to navigate between the social world and the existential world, something even deeper emerges. You discover that lucidity about the falseness of human conversations isn't an end in itself, but the beginning of an even broader understanding about the nature of communication and human connection. And this understanding transforms not just how you hear other people, but how you relate to yourself. Camus frequently wrote about the importance of remaining faithful to your own experience, even when that experience contradicts dominant narratives about how life should be lived. But he also understood that this fidelity doesn't mean isolation or superiority. On the contrary, when you truly accept your own absurd condition, when you stop trying to escape the fundamental complexity of being human, you become more capable of recognizing and honoring that same complexity in other people. You begin to perceive that the falseness you detect in conversations isn't necessarily the result of ill will or superficiality in people. It's often the result of fear of not being accepted if they tell the truth about what they really feel, fear of appearing weak if they admit uncertainty, fear of being rejected if they express the real complexity of their experience. People use conventional scripts not because they're lazy or dishonest, but because they're human, and humans need safety and acceptance to survive. This understanding brings a different form of compassion. When you hear someone talking about their career goals, using all the appropriate phrases about success and fulfillment, you're no longer just detecting the artificiality of the words. You're also perceiving the vulnerability behind the performance, the deep human desire for approval and belonging, the courageous attempt to create meaning, even when that meaning is based on values that aren't completely their own. And you discover you can honor both the performance and the vulnerability behind it. You can participate in the conversation at the level the person is offering the type of response they need to hear to feel understood, while simultaneously maintaining your awareness of the greater complexity that exists beneath the surface. It's not condescension, it's a refined form of love, the love that allows people to be where they are while remaining open to meeting them wherever they might be ready to go. This ability to meet people on multiple levels simultaneously transforms your experience of existential loneliness. You realize you're never really alone in your absurd condition. Everyone is dealing with the same fundamental question: how to create meaning and connection in a world that offers no guarantees. People just choose different strategies to deal with it. Some choose unconsciousness, others choose faith, others choose conscious revolt like you. But everyone is responding to the same fundamental condition. You also discover that your own authenticity doesn't need to be performative or dramatic. You don't need to constantly demonstrate to yourself or others that you're living genuinely. Authenticity becomes something more subtle and more integrated. It's simply the silent and constant refusal to betray your own experience. combined with availability to meet others where they are without judgment. Your conversations become spaces of existential hospitality. You offer people a place where they can rest from their constant performance, where they can express confusion without being corrected, where they can contradict themselves without being judged, where they can simply be human in all their messy complexity. And you do this not through grand gestures or philosophical proclamations, but through your presence, your ability to listen without trying to solve, to witness without trying to judge, to accompany without trying to direct. Over time, you realize that this ability to offer existential hospitality to others also transforms your relationship with yourself. You become gentler with your own contradictions, more tolerant of your own confusion, more compassionate with your own imperfect attempts to navigate life. You stop demanding from yourself a coherence that isn't humanly possible, and this creates a virtuous cycle. The more you accept your own complexity, the more capable you become of accepting the complexity of others. The more you honor your own imperfect attempts to create meaning, the more you can honor others' attempts, even when those attempts take forms that are different from yours. Camus saw this as one of the most important achievements of absurd consciousness, the ability to live simultaneously with total lucidity about the human condition and with deep love for humanity, including all its desperate and often misdirected attempts to escape that condition. You no longer need to choose between being conscious and being connected. Your consciousness becomes the very vehicle through which you connect more deeply with others. You discover there's a fundamental difference between cynicism and lucidity. The cynic sees falseness in human conversations and concludes that people are fundamentally dishonest or superficial. The lucid person sees the same falseness and recognizes in it evidence of how desperately everyone needs meaning, connection, and acceptance. Falseness becomes not a reason for contempt, but an invitation for deeper compassion. This distinction completely transforms your experience of daily conversations. When someone shares a concern using language that sounds generic or cliched, you don't focus on the genericness of the language. You focus on the reality of the concern. When someone expresses hopes for the future using phrases you've heard 1,000 times before, you connect not with the originality of the words, but with the humanity of the hoping. You also learn to do this with yourself. When you notice you're speaking in a way that sounds false or performative, you don't judge yourself harshly for it. You recognize that you were trying to find a way to connect or be understood, and that's fundamentally human and worthy of compassion, even when it's not completely authentic. This self-compassion is crucial because it allows you to continue experimenting with more authentic forms of expression without punishing yourself for attempts that don't work perfectly. You can try to express a complex feeling, discover that the words you chose don't completely capture what you wanted to say, and simply try again in a different way without drama or self-criticism. And you discover something surprising about language. It's much more flexible and creative than you imagined when you were trapped in conventional scripts. When you no longer need to make your words fit predetermined molds, when you give yourself permission to invent new ways of expressing your experience, you find resources in language you didn't know existed. You can begin to use uncommon metaphors to describe feelings that don't have conventional names. You can combine words in unexpected ways to capture nuances of experience that established categories can't encompass. You can create your own private vocabulary for aspects of your inner life that are unique to you. And when you share these creative expressions with other people, something magical often happens. They recognize in your uncommon words something about their own experience that they never managed to articulate. Your attempt to be more precise about your own experience ends up offering others tools to better understand their experience. This creates a different type of conversation, conversations where people are genuinely discovering new things about themselves and about the world through the very act of trying to express themselves more precisely. Instead of simply exchanging information or confirming what they already know, they're using language as a tool of exploration and discovery. At this point in the journey, you're living what can be considered the culmination of the Camusian response to the absurd, a life simultaneously lucid and passionate, consciously created and deeply connected. You completely accept that there's no guaranteed cosmic meaning, but this doesn't prevent you from creating abundant meaning through your choices, your relationships, and your availability to meet others in your shared humanity. And you realize this was always the real promise behind awakening to the falseness of conventional conversations. It wasn't a promise that you would find perfectly authentic conversations or completely genuine people. It was a promise that you would become free to participate more consciously and more creatively in the great human conversation, contributing your own unique voice while honoring everyone else's attempts to do the same. As this journey of lucidity deepens and integrates into your life, you discover that awakening to the falseness of human conversations was just the first step of a much broader transformation. You haven't just changed your way of hearing other people, you've fundamentally changed your relationship with existence itself. And in this change, you find something Camus considered the greatest possible achievement: the ability to affirm life completely, even knowing it doesn't come with guarantees or pre-established meanings. You realize that all your conversations, authentic or not, are part of something larger: humanity's collective attempt to create sense and connection in a universe that remains silent before our deepest questions. Each person you encounter is participating in this same attempt, using the tools they have available, doing their best with the understanding they possess in the moment. This perception brings a very specific form of reverence for human experience. Even the most superficial conversations begin to seem touching when you see them as evidence of the irrepressible human desire for connection. Even the most cliched scripts gain a poetic quality when you recognize them as courageous attempts to build bridges over the fundamental abyss that exists between one consciousness and another. You develop what we can call double vision. You're able to see simultaneously the performance and the humanity behind the performance, the falseness and the genuine desire that motivates that falseness, the superficiality of the words and the depth of the needs those words try to satisfy. And this double vision doesn't create confusion or paralysis. It creates a more refined and more effective way of navigating the human world. Your own words become more precise and more free at the same time. Precise because you're no longer trying to fit your experience into categories that don't serve you. Free because you no longer fear expressing aspects of your experience that don't conform to conventional expectations. You speak from a place that is simultaneously deeply personal and universally human. And you discover this is the central paradox of authenticity. The more specific and personally honest you become, the more you touch something universal. When you stop trying to be relatable according to conventional standards and begin to express your real experience, people often feel you're speaking directly to them in a way that generic words never could. Camus saw this as evidence that there's something fundamentally shared in the human condition, something that transcends superficial differences of culture, personality, or circumstance. We all face the same basic dilemma: how to live consciously in a world that doesn't offer clear instructions, how to create authentic connection amid the need for social performance, how to find meaning without being certain that meaning is real in some cosmic sense. When you speak from your real experience of this dilemma, when you honestly express what it's like for you to try to be human in this world, you automatically invite others to recognize their own experience of this same dilemma. And in this mutual recognition, something precious happens. Two people meet not in their masks or performances, but in their naked and shared humanity. These moments of genuine encounter become, for you, the hidden jewels of existence. Not because they're frequent or predictable, but because they're possible. In a universe that guarantees nothing, that doesn't promise that life will have meaning or that people will understand each other, the mere possibility of authentic encounter becomes something worth living for. And you learn to cultivate these moments not through techniques or strategies, but through your own availability, your capacity to be present, to listen without agenda, to witness without judging, to share your own experience without trying to impose it on others. You become a person with whom it's safe to be real, and this naturally attracts other people who are also starving for more authentic connections. But you also learn that not every conversation needs to or can be deeply authentic. You recognize that conventional social interactions have their own beauty and function. They create the social fabric that allows all of us to function together. They offer comfort and predictability in a world that often seems chaotic. They provide common ground where very different people can meet and cooperate. You learn to value these different types of conversation for what they are, instead of judging them for what they're not. You can fully participate in a conversation about the weather, appreciating its function as a ritual of mutual recognition and civility. You can engage in a discussion about weekend plans, valuing how this type of conversation creates a sense of continuity and shared purpose. The difference is that you're no longer exclusively dependent on these types of conversation to feel connected with other people. You have access to a much broader range of communicative possibilities, from the most superficial social ritual to the deepest existential encounter, and you can consciously navigate between them according to what each situation calls for. This communicative versatility becomes a form of generosity. You can offer people the type of interaction they need in the moment without feeling frustrated when that need is for something more superficial than you might prefer. You can honor where people are in their journey instead of trying to force them to be where you are in yours, and you discover that this communicative generosity creates an environment where authenticity can emerge naturally. When people feel they're not being judged for their scripts or performances, when they feel it's safe to be exactly where they are, they often feel freer to explore more genuine forms of expression. You become a catalyst for authenticity, not through confrontation or criticism, but through acceptance and presence. Your own availability to be real creates a space where others can also experiment with being more real. Your capacity to listen without trying to solve encourages others to share aspects of their experience they normally keep private. And in this process, you discover something that might seem paradoxical. Completely accepting the falseness of human conversations leads you to experience more moments of genuine conversations than you ever experienced before. When you stop fighting against the human condition and begin to work with it, when you learn to honor both the needs that lead to performance and the deep desire for authenticity that exists in everyone, you become capable of participating much more fully in the great human conversation. In the end, you realize that lucidity about the falseness of human conversations wasn't a curse or a burden. It was an invitation to participate more consciously, more creatively, and more compassionately in the collective attempt to create meaning and connection. An invitation to become a person who contributes to the possibility of more authentic encounters, instead of simply lamenting their absence. And perhaps most importantly, it was an invitation to accept your own humanity completely, including your own need for social performance, your own tendency to use familiar scripts when you're insecure, your own imperfect attempts to communicate experiences that transcend available language. True lucidity isn't about placing yourself above the human condition, but about inhabiting it fully, with all its paradoxes and contradictions. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the task of pushing the rock up the mountain had become easy, or because it gained some cosmic meaning, but because Sisyphus chose to completely embrace his condition, finding dignity and even joy in the struggle itself. Similarly, when you completely accept that human conversations will always be, to some degree, imperfect performances, trying to build bridges over chasms of misunderstanding, you free yourself to find beauty and meaning in the very act of trying to communicate. You become someone who can fully participate in the human comedy, not because you stopped seeing its elements of tragedy, but because you learned that tragedy and comedy are inseparable in human experience. And in this full participation, in this complete acceptance, in this loving revolt against the temptation to withdraw from the world, you find not the answers you thought you were looking for, but something much better: the ability to live the questions with grace, courage, and even joy. Lucidity about the falseness of human conversations reveals itself in the end, not as an end but as a beginning, the beginning of a way of living that is simultaneously more realistic and more hopeful, more conscious and more connected, more individual and more solitary. It's the beginning of a life that completely affirms the human condition, not despite its paradoxes and limitations, but through them and with them. And in this affirmation, you find something no perfectly authentic conversation could offer: the peace that comes from completely accepting what it means to be human in a world that doesn't come with instructions, and the joy that emerges when you choose to create meaning and connection anyway, magnificently anyway.